So I hope everybody's well. What I wanted to talk about today was several topics. I'm going to try to bunch them under this whole title of spiritual laziness, because it's something that's coming up a lot. And it's making me wonder if people are really listening to what's actually being said in any of these meetings, not just by myself, but by other teachers as well. And what exactly people believe realization is. The motivation for this video is quite simple. I've noticed recently that when people get to a certain point in a conversation with you, what will happen is they will fall back on a couple of really lazy statements. So for example, when they need to actually do the work themselves, they'll fall back on statements like, well, you're the teacher, you have to tell me anyway. You're the teacher, you have to wake us up. Or, oh, it's just happening. And yes, it is just happening, but in that particular space, in that context, when we're really trying to engage in a spirit of inquiry, to throw such a lazy statement out invariably comes from a place of insecurity, and it comes from a place of a real lack of understanding. And also it's something that the mind is doing in order to keep that story going on. And what's really incredible is when you get these advanced seekers who've gone to see all these different teachers, and as I say, could probably do a better talk than most speakers. And yet when that moment of impact, that moment of meeting is there, will invariably always just back off. And it's incredible to watch, because it's almost like what they're saying is, I want to carry on seeking. I really don't want to take that final step. And we have to examine why we are doing that and what our motivations are for doing that. And I remember years ago, I did a video called Examine the Reasons Why You're Seeking. And I think when we get to that uncomfortable point where instead of really getting into inquiry or really looking into why we're seeking, we feel that need or that temptation to throw out a knee-jerk statement, then I think that's the time when we need to really stop and really try to examine why it is that we're feeling this need to come out with this knee-jerk statement. And it can be an uncomfortable place. And the reason it can be an uncomfortable place is because you are about to meet yourself. The idea of duality is about to die. And that can be, for some, a scary place, because what would you do if your stories all disappear? What would you do if you no longer need to seek or go to meetings? And that can be quite scary, because for some people, seeking and this whole idea of realization has become an entire life to them. And why would they want to give that up? Because it gives them a sense of worth and it gives them a sense of purpose. And it allows them to sometimes feel special as well. I've had several people over the years turn up at talks who are really just seeking because they want to feel special, or they want to lord it up over their friends when they wake up. A classic case in point was a lady who didn't want her friends to come along because she really didn't want them to wake up before she woke up, which is kind of crazy because there's no guarantee anybody's actually going to wake up. But it's incredible how our mind plays these little games out. And it's whether we will, instead of making these beautiful expansive statements which sound so wonderful and make us sound like we're so spiritual, whether we will stop, allow ourselves to be uncomfortable and examine our motivations, and to examine why we're saying things like, oh, well, it's just this at that moment of impact, or examine why we're even coming to these talks and what our motivation is. And I think if we were to really be honest, we would probably find that most of us don't really want to wake up. Most of us really haven't got a clue what realization is and what it entails and what it means to inquire. I had somebody say to me last week that they were very well versed in self-inquiry. Well, if you're very well versed in self-inquiry, then maybe if you're still doing it, you've got to look at whether you are doing it properly, or whether it's being used as a mere plaything because you really don't want to use it as a tool to really wake up. And I think we have now, with the proliferation of the internet, and this like instant access, around the clock, so much more resources now to actually wake up to who we truly are. But what happens is, instead we take all these videos and we take these books and these meetings, and we, in a sense, almost gorge on that information, or we just hoard this information. And it prevents us, from seeing who we really are, because, as the Sufi state, the last veil is the veil of knowledge. And it's incredible how we don't want to let that knowledge go. You know, we believe we're something special, and that's where a real spiritual arrogance kind of comes into it, where, you know, we feel that because we know how to talk a certain way or be a certain way, that we're so much better than the other. I think the acid test is whether this idea of seeking has died in you. That's what really matters, not how many books you've read or how many teachers you've got to sit with, or how you can construct a question so much better than somebody else because guess what, you read I Am That before breakfast and, you know, backwards, forwards and every other way. I think that's a delusion, and it sometimes stems from the fact that we're not willing to make ourselves uncomfortable. We're not willing to do the work that really matters, and we instead fall back on this whole idea of laziness, that just as it gets interesting, just as we have that moment where we could realize who we truly are, to escape this bondage of seeking, to escape this whole idea of sitting in a room somewhere, you know, looking to some teacher or speaker for the answers, it's such a shame that we tend to back off and we use nonsensical statements that are completely out of context. And they're nonsensical because we don't really understand what they actually mean. We've heard somebody else saying them, so like children, we're going to parrot them as well. And it's doing yourself a real disservice. It's saying that you wish to stay in this limited body mind, to do absolutely everything you possibly can to prevent yourself realizing who you truly are, and living from this place of empowerment, from this place of oneness, from this place of, you know, truth. And instead wanting to either lord it up over people and believe you're something special, or you know, just being lazy. And when you're asked to actually examine the reasons you're seeking, or you're asked to actually look at why you're making these statements or what these statements actually mean, that you cower away and hide behind your books. Like I stated, you know, the Sufi said that the last veil of knowledge, so the last veil to drop is the veil of knowledge. And it's whether we can actually put down everything we know about this, whether we can unlearn everything that we've learned, and just to really just be in that natural state, in that pristine place where everything is just occurring as and how it's occurring, without anything being held on to or attaching ourselves to a certain point or a certain teacher or a certain way of being. And to honestly really look at ourselves and our motivations as to why we're doing this, or, you know, why we're seeking, or what have you. And if we can be brave and we can actually put this down to allow ourselves to be really brave, and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and to allow ourselves to be open, we may recognize that our actual natural state is something that's always here, and that we're functioning in this way of being regardless of whether we're seeking or not. And I think that's such a beautiful place to be. And I do sometimes wonder why people have a motivation that seems to be in the opposite direction of, I just want to be an advanced seeker, or I want to convince people that I'm so sincere about seeking, and I'm going from pillar to post and from teacher to teacher, and should a teacher say anything, or a speaker should say anything that offends me, then, you know, it's invariably the speaker's fault. Maybe we need to get honest and look at ourselves and take responsibility that it may actually be us. Because I feel with this thing called realization isn't really the end, it's really the beginning. And that's when we really get to learn about ourselves. That's when we really deepen our inquiry, and we swim through that ocean of consciousness. And it's such a wonderful journey, or a wonderful moment, a wonderful knowing or unknowing, because there is this constant collapse. There's this constant realization of who we truly are. And yet that does it such a disservice. So rather than speaking about this, rather than hiding behind the books or the knowledge that you feel you've accumulated, can we allow ourselves to be vulnerable? Can we allow ourselves to be open and actually take that step into the fire and just burn away that which is unnecessary?